Get a jump on your Christmas crafting with these easy no-sew projects. Thank you guys for stopping by Lavender and Lace. I'm Alicia. Welcome back to my viewers that come and see me each week. And hello if you are new here. Thank you so much for stopping by. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy today's content. And I hope you will consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Now let's get to these Christmas projects. You will need some type of plain backing fabric for this project as well as a decorative piece. I'm using some drop cloth that I picked up from Amazon and also this absolutely gorgeous print that I got from Hobby Lobby last year when their Christmas fabric was on sale. I'm going to be using that just to embellish my drop cloth and make a table runner for my dining room table. And I just measured out what size I would need. I just took my tape measure over to the table and just wrote down my measurements. And I just cut down my drop cloth to the size that I needed. And I had actually been working with this previously, so I had to put together two pieces of my drop cloth. I had cut it in half to make it easier to work with because I think this was 10 feet in length. So I just cut that down and got that to the size that I needed. And I also decided which of the portions of my decorative fabric that I wanted to use. I decided to go with the bigger squares, and this fabric was perfect. It already had these kind of blocked out and the lines there for me. So I just used my acrylic ruler and my rotary cutter and just cut down all of those wider strips that I'm going to be working with. I think there was maybe 3 or 4 different sections of that on this particular piece of fabric, and that worked out perfectly for me for this project. Of course, you can pick out whatever type of fabric that you like and that works best with your decor. And I just trimmed off any of that excess print that I didn't need for my project. Just kind of cleaned up my edges a little bit. And I also did that for my 2 pieces of drop cloth. I wanted to remove the stitching that they had, the seam on this side, because I am going to be fraying this at the very end of my project. And I just evened up all of the edges to make sure I had a decently square piece of fabric. I'm not very good at getting that completely square sometimes, but that's okay for this project. I wanted it to be rustic. And I mentioned that I did have 2 pieces of this, so I wanted to put those together. And to do that, I just used some fabric hot glue. I just laid one piece on top of the other and just lined up those edges. And this is just going to make kind of a seam down the middle of my table runner. And if you want to use your sewing machine, you can. I just opted to use the fabric hot glue, and that worked really well for me. And once I had these 2 pieces together, I did just take this over to my ironing board and just kind of iron that seam a little bit, just so that would lay flat and look nice and neat on my project. And to attach my 2 pieces of fabric together, I'm going to be using some of this heat and bond. This works great for projects like this when you want to attach 2 different types of fabric. I have so many ideas for this technique that I am going to be doing later on this fall, and probably some more Christmas ones as well. And this project was actually inspired by one that I did when I was a kid with my mom and my granny. We used to do these with sweatshirts. We would just pick out a sweatshirt that was our size and then a fabric that we liked and just cut out the design. And then we would just iron that onto our sweatshirt. If I can find a picture, I will just put that up on the screen for you guys. And be sure that you follow the instructions for the heat and bond. I've put them up here for you guys to see. It's a very easy process to do. I did just cut out my heat and bond first. That was just easier for me. And then I just lined it up with my fabric and followed the iron-on instructions for this. And it worked perfectly. I didn't have any issues with this product. And you can find the heat and bond on Amazon or Walmart as well. I'm sure they probably have it at Hobby Lobby. So it's just a really easy product to work with. And once I had that applied to all of my fabric pieces, I did just cut each of those sections apart and trimmed off any of that hangover that I might have had left from my heat and bond sheet. And once I had all of my, I'm calling them quilt block squares because that's kind of what this reminded me of. Once I had all of those cut apart, I started just playing around with the placement of them. I tried to decide how I wanted to lay these out and arrange them on my table runner. And I did use a ruler to kind of help me with my spacing and things like that. I started out just laying it everything out in one single row, and then I changed my mind. I actually kind of doubled it up. You'll see that here in just a minute. But it is helpful to have that ruler just so you get everything centered on your runner. And I also used some pins just to tack everything down once I had it lined up so it wouldn't move, and that just made it easier for me to iron on each of my designs. And this is how I actually ended up doing that. I just thought it looked better. Just the one single row down the center, I didn't think filled out my table runner as much as I wanted it to. And I did have to move this over to my dining room table because it is so big. It's probably about 7 feet in length, I think is what I measured that out. And then I just went over each of those squares and ironed them on to my table runner. And you want to be sure that you put something underneath your fabric so you protect whatever surface that you are ironing on. And I just continued that with each of my squares and moved all the way down my table runner. And of course, I wanted this to look a little bit rustic and farmhouse, so I did just pull out some of the threads all along each of the edges of my table runner. And you don't have to do this part. You could actually do a hem along either side if you wanted to, just to make that look a lot neater and not rustic. But I did just go along all of those edges, just pulled out as many as I wanted until I was happy with the look of my fringe. And of course, since this is kind of a recreation of a project that I did from my childhood, I had to use some of the fabric puffy paint just to embellish each of the squares. I had so much fun with this. It really did take me back to my childhood and just brought back all of those memories. And we did do this at Christmas time, so it was just fun thinking about the time that I spent with my mom and my grandma. And I just added that puffy paint in just a few areas. I didn't do a lot on here. One reason it would have taken me forever to get paint on every area of this. And a tip, I started at the top square and worked my way down, of course, so I wouldn't have any wet paint underneath my wrist and arm there where I was working on. So I just worked in sections and worked my way all the way down my table runner until I had all of my paint embellishments. I think it would also be cute to add some buttons or maybe some ribbon around the edges of this. I might actually go back in and do that with mine just to give it another decorative element. But that is it for this one. I am so happy with how this one turned out, and I cannot wait to display this at Christmas time. What do you guys think about this one? hate to throw away good pillowcases, so I actually had kept several on hand and they actually turned out great for this project. I had a couple of these cream colored ones as well as a couple of the buffalo check flannel pillowcases. So I did just measure those to make sure I would get my sizing right, and I went into Cricut Design Space and just put in square templates for 4 different pillowcases, and I just made sure to size them correctly. And I had found some of these really pretty farmhouse designs that I wanted to create stencils for, and also I did cut one of these out with some iron-on vinyl, and I just placed them onto my square shapes and got the sizing right for those as well. And I just like to change the color of like the background to what I'm actually working with, just to see what colors of paint and vinyl would look the best for my project. And I did just cut out my iron-on vinyl for this one pillowcase, and just to prep that, I smoothed out my pillowcase and I used just my heat press to warm up that pillowcase first. And of course, I just kind of played around with my vinyl just to make sure that I had that in the center of my pillowcase before I iron that on. And I like to use an additional pillowcase or a towel or something like that to protect my iron-on vinyl when I am doing projects. And be sure that you follow the manufacturer's instructions for the particular type of vinyl that you are using. That will just ensure that your project turns out the best that it possibly can. And I just removed that carrier sheet, and that one is finished. And moving on to the next one, I used some Dollar Tree vinyl just to cut out several stencils for my other pillowcases that I'm going to be transforming into large gift sacks for all of those bigger gifts that you might give at Christmas time. So I just reverse weeded my vinyl and got my stencil ready to go onto my pillowcase. I just used some transfer paper to help me do that. I used one of my large burnishing tools just to make sure all of my vinyl was stuck really well to my transfer paper, and just to make sure I didn't have any bubbles or wrinkles. And to prep my pillowcase, I did put a large piece of cardstock just down in the center that will prevent my paint from bleeding through to the back side of my gift bag. Just made sure I had that in the right spot where I would be applying my stencil to. And I think this is just such a fun way to reuse those pillowcases that you may no longer use, or that you've given away the sheets to, whatever it is. This is just a really great idea for those. And I did use some of the Craft Bond adhesive spray. I didn't do this on my first pillowcase, and I really should have, because it really helped my paint not to bleed through. And this really worked well to adhere my stencil to. And I also, once again, just used my large burnishing tool just to make sure I had that applied really well and I didn't have any bubbles or wrinkles before I started adding my fabric paint. And you just carefully want to remove your transfer paper and make sure you don't pull up any of the centers of your letters. And I had picked up some of this fabric paint from Walmart. I believe it was the Tulip brand. And I just applied one of my foam, or used one of my foam pouncers to apply my paint. And I did do a couple of coats of that just to make sure that I got really good coverage. This red was, of course, a little bit hard to get covered up with that white paint, but I really like the farmhouse vibes that I get from this project. And I carefully removed my stencil before my paint was completely dry. I did that because I wanted my paint to adhere well to my pillowcase, and I thought if it had completely dried, it might pull up in some areas. So I just carefully peeled that back and tried not to get any of that wet paint on the other areas of my pillowcase. And then I just used a pair of my Cricut tweezers just to remove the centers of those letters, and my gift bag is ready to go once it has completely dried. I love the way that these turned out, and they make great gift bags for your large gifts, as I had mentioned. And I think my preference would be the fabric paint versus the iron-on vinyl. I just like the effect that I got from those. But let me know what you guys think about this project. If you see these fleece Snugadoo, I think it's Snugadoo, mittens at Dollar Tree, you need to grab several of these because they are great for Christmas and wintertime projects. I just started by cutting these down. I cut off the wristband as well as the thumb portion, and I had some of these styrofoam foam balls in my stash. I think I picked those up at Walmart. Just wrapped that piece of mitten around each styrofoam ball, and just to close that up on the top of these, I just added some hot glue, and I kind of just worked in sections and just kind of pulled and pinched all of that together until I had it closed. And this did kind of leave a little bit of a gap, a small opening on the top of these ornaments, but all I had to do was just cut a smaller piece of that, just add a little bit extra hot glue and just tuck that in, and you would never notice that seam. This fabric is very forgiving and just allows you to get a clean finish. And I wanted to make a hanger for my ornaments, so I just tied a simple knot with some jute twine and added that to the top of each of these with some hot glue. And just for a little bit more security with my hanger there, I added another small piece of that fabric, and I also added some on either side of that as well, just to clean up any rough edges or anything like that, and that my ornaments would look nice and neat. And to embellish these, I had several things in my stash. I had some red pit berries, just some different types of greenery, some pine cones, and some different colors of ribbon, and I just added those with some hot glue however I thought that they looked the best. This was a very fun part of this process, and I did pick up those pine cones at Hobby Lobby. They had these out in the fall time. And of course, I had just cut down my greenery into some very small pieces just to add to the top of my ornaments. And I absolutely love how these turn out. These would be great to add onto the top of your gifts or on a gift bag this year for Christmas. Or you could just gift these as well. And I just love how these turned out. These are super sweet and absolutely adorable. What do you guys think about this one? Here's another super quick and easy project that you can do, and this one is a fun one to do with your kids or your grandkids. Of course, you will want to take some fabric that you have on hand. Christmas print is perfect, of course, for this one. And then you just want to cut those slits in the bottom and just rip all of your smaller pieces that you are going to be working with. You will need some styrofoam balls that you can find at Dollar Tree or Walmart, wherever you like to pick those up. Use some Mod Podge, and I just used a paintbrush to help me spread that around. and get my strips placed down. This is kind of a messy project. Your fingers will get covered with that Mod Podge, and it can make it a little bit difficult to get all of your fabric strips on there. But this one is a lot of fun and adds some perfect just rustic decor to any bowl or vase that you might have that you like to add some filler to. And you just continue that all the way around your styrofoam ball. Just make sure that you are kind of overlapping those fabric strips to get everything covered up, and that is it. And I'll also combine these with some smaller styrofoam balls and just wrap those with some colored aluminum foil. And this is a perfect centerpiece for your Christmas table this year. What do you guys think about this one? I love to make different ornaments every year and add to my handmade tree that I like to display in our dining room. I had picked up these wood slice ornaments from Hobby Lobby, and I started by painting these front and back with 2 coats of my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster. And I got a little smart here and removed the hangers. That made it a lot easier to paint these, you guys. I thought I might be able to get those painted without doing that, but I decided to go ahead and make my life a little bit easier. And I took some of my Mod Podge and just gave the top surface a light coat of that and let it dry. And I grabbed some of my ticking stripe fabric as well as my green print, and I just cut that down to size to fit on the top of my ornaments. I just traced that out with a pencil and just cut that out. And I just pulled a few of those threads around my circle of fabric just to fray the edges a little bit. And I grabbed my Teflon sheet and my little Cricut mini press. I had that preheating, and I just used that to reactivate that Mod Podge and iron on my fabric. This just applies really well when you do that. You don't get any wrinkles or creases. And I just repeated all of those steps for my second ornament. And I just took my awl and just poked through that fabric so I would be able to reattach my jute twine hanger. And I also wanted to make these a little bit more antique. That plaster colored paint was just a little too bright for me. I wanted to age these a little bit. So before I added all of my embellishments, I just went around the edges of this with my antique wax. And I had pulled out several different things from my stash. Some lace ribbons, some berries, greenery picks, just some wooden snowflakes, and some letter tiles. And I just decided what design I wanted to put on each of my ornaments. And I just glued everything down with some hot glue. This is the fun part for this project, and you can just embellish these however you would like to. These would also make perfect gift tags for your gifts this year. And for my greenery, I like to do a dry fit first. I just lay everything down and make sure that I like the way that it looks and that it's going to fit well on the top of my ornament. And of course, just glue that down with some hot glue. You can add as much or as little as you would like to these. I just love how these turn out. And I also had made some of these with some napkins as well. Those are super cute, and this is just a really fun and easy project. And of course, I'm getting all the farmhouse vibes from these. What do you guys think about these easy ornaments? For this last project, you will only need a couple of things, something to make your garland, and I just used some jute twine for that. And you will need some fabric. I picked up this bundle from Amazon, and I will link that for you guys in the description box. But this project comes together super fast, and it is so easy to do, especially if you have a good helper like I did when I was working on this. And I just cut some slits at the bottom of each piece of my fabric. These were about an inch in width, and then I just ripped all of those strips off. And this project does take probably more fabric than you think it does, but you can cut your strips of fabric a little bit wider if you want to, and that fills it out a little bit better. And then I just folded each of my strips in half and just cut that in the center. And then I just started tying each of my strips to my jute twine and just filled in my garland. And I don't tie these too tight. That will just allow me to move them around and fluff my fabric as needed. But this is just a super quick and easy addition that you can add to your Christmas decor this year. Just gives you a lot of those cozy, homey country vibes. I love how this one turned out. Let me know what you guys think about this one. That wraps up our projects for today. I hope you will consider giving one of these a try. Please give this video a thumbs up and let me know which one of these projects was your favorite. Be sure that you click that notification bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. I hope you all have a blessed day, and I will see you in the next one.